Awesome. Welcome back, everybody, to yet another episode of Record Live. These just come around so fast, as I usually say. But it's true. Weeks just are flying by at the moment. How are you holding up, Jared? How's your family?
Doing okay.
Yeah,
It's all still happening. It's a shame. My wife is very disappointed that the Olympics are finished because that was like something fun and exciting and escapist to watch during these lockdown times that we're living in.
Although the Paralympics are happening soon, apparently, so that's something.
They are, and the Paralympics are almost more inspiring than the regular Olympics. For me, at least, It's quite fascinating to see. Looking forward to that. But yeah, we're doing okay. How about you, Mary Ellen?
Oh yeah, holding up all right. I have a very different stitch. While you're like crammed with 3 people in a small space, it's just me in my small little space. So it's a little quiet, a little lonely sometimes, but overall I'm grateful and God is good. So John, hello. Nice to have you on our stream again today. Good to see you. So today, Jared, we are continuing the theme for this month, and that month is August. And what is August?
August is Science Month, and we have an incredibly special guest today, Mary Ellen, a man of many talents, a man who we both admire and look up to, who we get to work with on a daily basis, and who is just an epically awesome Pole, a proud Pole, not the sort that sits out in the car park, but a Polish heritage Australian who is who loves football and all things signs of the times. So I'm very excited. Shall we bring him on before we talk him up too much further? How are you, Daniel? Great to have you with us today.
You're making me blush. That is the most flattering info I've ever received.
Words of affirmation, bro. We love you, and we're glad to have you on the broadcast with us today. It should be fun.
Yeah, excited.
Yeah, for sure. So, Daniel, I think probably a lot of people will have maybe met you before, whether that's through record stuff or through science stuff, because usually people follow both. And you have been a guest on Record Live before, so it's great to have you back. But for those who haven't met you, do you want to just introduce yourself, what you do, what your day-to-day looks like, a bit of that stuff?
Yeah, my name is Daniel Kuberek. I'm the assistant editor for Science Magazine. I've been in that role for 3 years now. I think it's been 3 years. But yeah, so my day-to-day is there's so many things. It could be anything from communicating with our authors, one of whom just asked why you don't have a beard. G'day, Dave. Dave writes for us. Anywhere through to commissioning articles, writing my own articles, writing in news snippets, researching, creating videos, creating podcasts, taking photos. Yeah, there's just every day is different.
Yes, we did mention you're multi-talented, but that doesn't quite cover it because I feel like you do everything, Daniel. You hold down the fort very well. Jared, I feel like you're about to jump in there. I won't interrupt.
Well, I was just going to say, yes, he saves me a lot of headaches because without Daniel, science would have ground to a halt potentially, especially in lockdown times. He's working hard there. And it's good to see that you've joined the Beard Club, Daniel. I like this lockdown look that you've got going. I know a few of our regular viewers are fans of the beard, so yeah, it's nice to have another good-looking beard on the show. Not that
I'll tell you what. It is pretty annoying in lockdown though. Like when you're sitting at home all day, there's all this dry air, and it's funny you mentioned that because I have this bit of beard balm that sits with me all the time. It really helps sculpt it.
Keep very nice.
Quite bougie. So today, Daniel, we're going to talk about one of your passions, which is Signs of the Times, among many passions. But yeah, this magazine, as we sort of touched on last week, is an incredible resource for so many reasons. But I titled the broadcast today something along the lines of sharing Jesus, is it easier than we think it is? Is it easier than we think it is? That's right. Because I feel like there's a lot of mixed emotions, mixed perspectives when it comes to the topic of sharing Jesus, like what that looks like and sort of the environments in which we share it. Because I think, especially in the Western world, people are becoming a bit hesitant to talk about religion at all, let alone Christianity. So I guess from your perspective and what you do day to day, how does Signs specifically like enter that space? Like, how is it designed? Like, what do you do on a daily basis that makes sure that it is something that we can share? If that makes sense.
All right, so probably to answer why Signs Magazine is an effective tool to be shared, maybe it's worth explaining why people have those barriers that you mentioned just then. And
Okay.
it's funny that you even want to go down this path, because I actually did a sermon. I sort of did a devotional at the South Pacific Division that I then expanded into a sermon that I preached at the Pendle Hill Church in Sydney, which was about the barriers that people have when they approach Christianity. Because in the work that we do at Signs Magazine, we say, for example, might run an ad or a booster post that goes out on social media, and these posts receive a lot of engagement from people who might not be Christian. So you get a sort of a grasp of the perspectives that people have out there, and some of them are genuinely very hostile. Now, there's various ways that you can sort of unpack this. I feel like one of the big problems is that people don't really understand the context of the Bible. That's a big barrier. But it sort of, in my sermon, it led me to do this thing where we drew this like sort of a stick figure of a person and asked the church, well, what do you think are the barriers that are preventing this person from receiving the gospel? And actually, going around to churches and preaching that particular sermon, we brainstormed a bunch of those, and they included things like being hurt by the church, misinformation on social media, myths about the Bible. They don't know where to start. It's easier to dismiss the Bible rather than to research. Too busy. People don't feel worthy of love. They struggle with a search for answers, and they don't understand the concept of God in a broken world. And that's just a couple of the many barriers that people have when they are thinking about the Bible and Jesus. Now, Signs of the Times is the church's premier evangelistic magazine. It's the one that you'd find in various public places. One of my first experiences with the magazine was actually, apart from seeing it at church growing up, I remember one time I was sitting at some random dentist, and there was a copy of Signs of the Times magazine with a famous person on the front cover. And I actually remember feeling super proud because that was an Adventist publication right there, and people were sitting there in the lobby and reading this magazine. The challenge that Signs Magazine has is that we have to break past these barriers. Now, how do you do that? Well, I don't think that we have all the answers, but I do certainly know that Signs Magazine has been a part of various people's journeys, because the content that we have in the magazine is accessible and it's relevant. So we try to base all of our articles around this idea to make it accessible and relevant. Rather than assuming Christian knowledge, we try to explain and introduce. I really think of it as an introductory tool. Like if you think about the sort of the journey that a person can go to on their faith, with their faith, that can be different for everyone, and they could enter in at a variety of different points. But I really do think that Signs is a lot closer to the beginning, and that's a really important thing to remember, because if we don't remember that, then we sort of fundamentally misunderstand what the mission of the magazine is.
I think, Daniel, in this day and age, one thing that with sharing Jesus, there's the barriers that we have to think about, how do we overcome some of those things, but there's also the methods, I guess, different ways to share Jesus. And you mentioned podcasts and videos and different options for sharing that Signs utilizes, but a lot of people might have the argument, and we're a bit biased. We put that disclaimer up the front because we all work in magazines, but a lot of people might say, but magazine industry is a dying industry. What are some of the methods that we can share Jesus effectively, and why are magazines, I guess, still effective in that space from your perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting, Jared. A wise man, one of my uni tutors, actually mentioned to me once that no one form of media ever fully overtakes another. Like you think about cassette players and VCRs and stuff, they still exist and people still use them. They just become a lot more niche. You think about radio, shouldn't radio be overtaken by Spotify now? No, radio is still a thing. So to be honest, the question that you raised just there is something that we discussed a lot when I was studying my degree in journalism, which was already almost like 5 years ago now, which was where is this going to go once the publication, the traditional publication dies out? And to be honest, now that I've been in this role working for a magazine publication for a number of years, I think that the publication still serves a need in the community. And while we have ourselves, we provide our magazine articles as well online. We do a podcast and we do make videos and stuff. The magazine, it's a personal tool, I think, because what you miss with online is, well, how are you going to share it? Well, you can send the link to someone, sure. Are they going to jump onto that? Like the research says that our attention span is much, much shorter online. So how does the magazine, the physical magazine, then sort of fill into that space? Well, what I know from the people that do use the magazine is they take it and like they apply it to a personal relationship that they have with someone. And I think that is also almost more powerful than just sending a link to an online article or an online piece to someone.
I think that's really important. That personal relationship, because I think anyone that we hope to get to know Jesus, that we hope to share Jesus with, they need they need a relationship to start. And I think, as you said, the magazine is most effective when we know someone that we're giving it to and we actually hand it to them and say, hey, this is a really good article that I think speaks into where you're at the moment, because I know you and you've told me some of the things you're going through. I think this story really touches on that. The other thing that I appreciate about magazines still is there a physical, you mentioned finding it in the dentist lobby, seeing it in that waiting room. It's a physical thing. So digital content is great and can be shared and get many sets of eyes all around the world instantaneously. But to be a bit more targeted, to go into actual physical spaces where people are at, where they're congregating, where they're waiting, you can do that with a magazine or a book or a piece of physical content that we're providing. So I think that, I remember when I was at uni, a lot earlier than you were, Daniel, quite a bit before, the same conversation was being had. Are books going to die out? Are magazines and newspapers going to die out? And what we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years since I've left uni is they haven't. It's just changed, and some people are picking up physical texts again. Nathan Brown, actually, Mary Ellen, wrote us an interesting piece for Record, which we're publishing this month in August, where he talked about the power of retention. And Daniel talked about our concentration spans shortening, but also our ability to retain information or to remember what we've read is so much greater from a piece of paper, a physical book or text, than a screen, actually taking in the information through the screen. And so to the point where some schools, they all went on the iPad journey. They all gave all their kids laptops so they could study more easily. Now they're moving back to textbooks and notepads and things because they're like, well, we need kids to actually write. We need them to actually take in information back in the more traditional ways because it works with the brain better. So I think that's another reason why that physical product is really helpful to have.
Can I jump in here with some thoughts, actually? Sorry.
Yeah.
I was actually preaching at Wahroonga on the weekend, and before I did so, I wanted to do a bit of research on what Ellen White said about literature ministry, because out there we have quite a number of literature evangelists, who are actually using science magazines as well as using Ellen White books and health books and that sort of stuff. And so she said in her book Colporteur Ministry this, you don't mind if I read it out to you? There are many places in which the voice of the minister cannot be heard, places which can only be reached by our publications. The books, papers, and tracts fill the Bible truths that the people need. We should treat as sacred treasure every line of printed matter that comes from our publishing houses. Even the fragments of a pamphlet or of a periodical should be regarded as of value. Oh yeah, she goes on to say, who can estimate the influence that a torn page containing the truths of the third angel's message may have upon the heart of some seeker after truth? Now, the reason why that's such an interesting statement is because actually there was this guy called G.F. Jones, right? He was a missionary, but before he was a missionary, he was working on a ship that was sailing across the Atlantic, and he wasn't a Christian at that stage. And he found a torn off piece of paper on the boat that he was on. And that torn off piece of paper was from a magazine called Present Truth and Signs of the Times, which was the United Kingdom version of Signs of the Times. And because of that printed, like ripped off piece of paper that he read, he then started looking for Adventist books. He became an Adventist after that. And then he decided to get married. He became a missionary, and he started traveling all over the globe doing missionary work. And the huge amount of members that we have, the tens of thousands of members that we have in the Solomon Islands, stem in large part because of G.F. Jones, who started his whole journey with reading that ripped off piece of paper of Signs of the Times, which, you know, when you read what Ellen White says in Colporteur Ministry about the ripped off piece of paper, it's just crazy.
Wow. What an incredible
And
story.
I think in the Solomons we have a school called Jones Missionary College, named after G.F. Jones, which is really nice.
Yeah.
We have a couple of comments here from Dave, which I'd like to explore in a second. But before we get to that, I just wanted to add something to that conversation about like the persistence of like Signs of the Times magazine and why it's like, you know, print is still around. And it's kind of also a bit of a question as well, because Signs of the Times, I think, is different to a lot of other faith magazines. Like, okay, for example, Adventist Record. It's a very Adventist, got Adventist on the cover. You know it's a church denominational magazine. And that's the same for magazines from, you know, the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Baptists, whatever. They've all got these like denominational magazines. But Signs of the Times, I think, is a bit different because it's not quite as in your face churchy as a lot of other magazines are. And that's probably a good thing, or at least in Western society, with the distrust of, you know, denominations and that kind of thing. Someone probably isn't necessarily going to pick up a denominational magazine as much as they're going to pick up a Signs of the Times because it's its own brand. And I'm wondering, you know, how do you navigate that practically, Daniel? Because like this magazine is supported by Adventists, you know, it's funded by Adventists, and yet it's more of an outreachy kind of a magazine. So is it explicitly Adventist, or where do you draw that line, I guess?
I guess this is where we can go into a bit of a history lesson, because Signs of the Times magazine in Australia used to be called Bible Echo. And then what happened was the government put a rule in that if you want to have, I think it was free postage, then your magazine has to have a certain amount of news content. And so then Bible Echo became Bible Echo and Signs of the Times. And that's when this sort of focus on current events really started, as far as being almost like a news magazine. But it wasn't just, you know, looking for government incentives, because I think a large part of, you know, the feedback that we get as far as who picks up the magazine, the first thing they say is the front cover. The front cover really catches my eye. They say, like, Jared and I recently went to Adra Logan, which we'll talk about later. And one of the things they said is people come in here, they see the signs rack, and the first thing that catches their eye is the front cover. The front cover is addressing a specific topic that's being discussed in the news. Now, we're not just about discussing the news and that sort of stuff. We're about providing hope in a world that is, you know, going through pain, that is going through navigating tricky issues. How do we add a Christian voice to that? So that's why our slogan is a Christian perspective on the world today. So that sort of is the reason why we have why we look at current events in the magazine.
So the content itself is is Adventist, but it doesn't like say it's Adventist. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we don't shy away from that. In fact, if you look on the sort of the inside cover there's our logo there. But again, it's coming back to where are we in the journey? You know, we're right at the beginning, which means that we're introducing people to Christianity, to Jesus. Now, that does mean introducing them to important things that Adventists believe, like the state of the dead. But it doesn't mean we're going to be going into a hardcore, in-depth study that's going to freak someone out who's going to be reading it for the first time and has never heard of this stuff before. So the Adventist, at its heart, it is Adventist, but it's Adventist that is very easy to introduce people.
Yeah, I like that.
Just building on that, Mary Ellen, I would just say we are unashamedly Adventists, and we won't ever go against sort of church doctrine. We hold to the fundamentals, and we're not going to contradict or disagree with those things, but we're not aiming at having those conversations with Adventists. What we're saying is, and we run into trouble sometimes when our supporters or our donors think that they don't agree with something, or they're not comfortable with something in the magazine, or they're saying, why is that? We have to get the message across. Well, this isn't for you. You're at the bread, as Paul sort of talks about the meat or the milk. You know, these guys are at the meat stage. They're ready to share their faith and to share signs. But those that are just encountering signs, they need milk. They need the doctrines distilled into a very simple and very non-jargonistic way of explaining, you know. So we try and explain the terms that we use simple language. If we're going to use terms like salvation, righteousness, grace, we have to explain what those things actually are, because they're becoming less and less prevalent in Western society. People don't know what those words mean because they never use them outside of a church context. And so if we're hoping to reach people outside of a church context, and, you know, we like to get practical here, and this can go beyond the magazine signs pages. It can go into your daily conversations with workmates and the encounters that you have in your spheres of influence. We should use language that doesn't confuse or turn people away from the gospel, but explains it in simple terms. And a lot of that comes back to, what has Jesus done for me, and how can I express that in a simple, non-jargonistic manner?
Yeah. We have a couple of questions, or comments, I should say, here. The first is from Elliot, who kind of makes a comment about like the printed mediums we were just talking about before. Memorizing the Bible narrative gave way to the printed page, which has to a large extent made way to mag media, computers. People used to rely on their memories for information. As print developed, people relaxed their memory to remember only where they found the information. In the computer age, people have given both away and remember only Dr. Google. I know I relate to this a lot. I can usually remember a website, but I don't know what was on it. So, yeah, I wonder what the retention rates for something like Signs is in comparison. Be interesting to know. Dave then makes an interesting comment, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit, about evangelism and what that means. He says, our Western evangelical Christianity has redefined evangelism, verbal defense of beliefs, as every Christian's job. Interestingly, in the early church, evangelism was the role of key evangelists who took the message to new places. The vast majority of Christians were known through their love, not their words. Living in community, sharing resources, being inclusive, and bearing all things together, kingdom love lifted up Christ and drew the neighbors towards the community of believers. So I guess
Can I make a comment about that?
Yeah, no, please.
Because that's a very interesting comment, Dave. I think with Signs Magazine, one thing that we have been challenged with in the past is we need these magazines to go out into the community. So we have a lot of passionate foot soldiers who already do so. An approach we've had in the past is trying to convince church members to become those foot soldiers. But recently, we've actually changed our approach somewhat. And I think it ties into what you're saying, because, you know, our colleague at Adventist Media by the name of Tim did some research. And he actually looked into what are the barriers that are preventing people from sharing Jesus. And the ones that he mentioned as the highest ones are fear of being too pushy, feeling inequipped, don't want to offend, lack of opportunity, fear of rejection, and fear of hostility. Now, everyone who's listening to this would probably be able to identify with some of those. And the question is then, when you have a magazine like Signs, which is, its purpose is to be out in the community, and yet, as church members, we have these barriers like feeling too pushy, don't want to offend, lack of opportunity, fear of rejection. I don't know if I hand my magazine to my neighbor, that they're going to think less of me, that they're going to reject it, and then all of a sudden things will become awkward. Well, the question is then, well, how do you share the magazine if there's those barriers? Like it seems insurmountable. Well, I think the approach we've taken and really emphasized more recently, and we're really emphasizing for Signs Month, is the fact that there are those projects where the magazine is already there. There's no one particular person that's passing them out and doing that sort of interpersonal thing, and yet all the magazines are gone. They're gone because people are seeing this interesting thing that is there. They're picking up and reading it. So yeah, I think it's pretty interesting because the magazine almost speaks for itself in some ways. And when you look at the fact that the magazines are being taken all the time, and in fact, a lot of these projects that have the magazine are finding that they're running out. Well, the question is then, how can people be engaged in that process of sharing Jesus by having the magazines there? And I think making sure that they will be there and making sure that the magazines are being sponsored to be there is one way of sharing Jesus from the comfort of your own home, where you don't have to go out there and confront these difficult barriers.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of
Mary Ellen,
yeah,
if I can just add to that a little bit, we do believe that the core of our Christian identity is love, and Daniel and I have been talking about making that a core principle, a communication principle of Signs going forward. So we want to share stories of Christians who love their communities. We want to share stories of how God changes people's lives through love. And so that, I think we're going to be looking for those sort of stories, to tell more stories, to show why and to demonstrate how Christians are being loved in the world, so that we have that aspect as well. Yes, we can defend our beliefs or do the apologetics, the evangelism thing in Dave's definition of the word. That's an important aspect of Signs, and it always has been historically. But we also need to show that the core value of us as Christians is that love, and that if people come to God, if they come to Christians through the pages of Signs as their first contact, that love will be a central thing. We talk about it a lot on this program about how Jesus said, love one another, and how, love trumps fear. We can get down the road of signs of the times being the world's going crazy, everything's fearful, everything's terrible, but sharing that hope that Daniel mentioned before, and then showing that even in terrible times, we still have love for one another, that Christians still center on that love concept because God is love. That's a really important part of our strategy going forward, is to tell stories that demonstrate Christianity's love for the world.
Mm. Speaking of these stories, both of you went to Logan and Brisbane recently to film a little bit of a testimony video of this love in action. I might just share.
Just before lockdowns, we escaped, didn't we, Daniel? And we got that done because if we'd left it, if it was scheduled a week or two later, unfortunately, I don't think we would have been able to do it. But I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to go up there, and Daniel shot this video that you're about to see. So props to Daniel, our multi-talented man.
Can I just say a few words about ADRA? Because I think part of the reason why we went up there was one of the things that has caught my eye since I've been working with Signs Magazine is that ADRA Logan have been upping their subscription all the time. And actually the manager there, who is now the manager of ADRA in South Australia, Henk Ledru, was the key champion of that. So, shortly before he was finishing up at ADRA, up there in Logan, we tried to catch up with him up there and see what it is actually that what kind of impact the magazine is having in the community. So we kind of hadn't had this the the knowledge of what happens to the magazine next. So it was like a bit of a journey of discovery for both Jared and I as we were there and we were finding this out. So yeah.
That's awesome. Hopefully this works. Just press.
There's a saying that at all times preach the gospel, when necessary use words. And the Logan slogan is caring, helping and supporting. The Logan's a phenomenal place when it comes to need for community. There is so much hurt, there's so much pain in this world. And what have we got to offer? And to be able to offer some really beautiful things that God has done for us is just, to me, is beyond everyday thinking.
If people really realize what type of dramas and some things that people have gone through in their life, I used to be very judgmental. Once you hear the people's story, I say to myself, if I had that experience, where would I have been in my life?
I've been here now nearly 9 years. Until I started working here, I didn't realise how many people out there are going without their meals. And if anybody ever comes in here and says that they're hungry, we will do our utmost to try and give them something, even if it's just a loaf of bread. And I think without Adra here, Logan would be in a terrible position.
I've had grown men, come into my office and they're broken people, partners that have beaten them, or they've had issues where they've been thrown out of home and they've lost everything. They've lost their work, they've lost their family, their kids and so forth. And they are just smashed men, And to sit with them at my desk and to talk with them and just to try and instill a little bit of hope into their lives, that's special. That's something you cannot get anywhere else.
Logan actually has 217 ethnic communities, so the whole world is here.
I haven't been able to study until I met Adra. Now they're helping me to get into a chorus, which is like the best thing I could do.
Once I was at the supermarket at Marsden and this lady came up to me and gave me a big hug, which sort of like threw me. And then she told me that her daughter came in and spoke to me, and her daughter was contemplating suicide, and her daughter didn't do suicide because she came in here and was speaking to us.
You've got to have multiple ways to reach people, so it's not just one size fits all. So what are the mediums that people are utilising to hear stories? And I think Signs is a valuable one for us as well.
It is very important to have a magazine that actually deals with felt needs, things that are not always overtly spiritual, but maybe under the surface they've got spiritual longings and desires.
We were gifted a stand by the Signs that sits in the front in our front reception area. We have two areas, one's at the op shop and one's in the main reception. And we found that to be the best place because whilst they're waiting for their food to be prepared or their information to be processed, they just reach over and they grab a magazine and they start flicking through it. And they have a look at the pictures or start looking at topics, and then they hold on to them. And that's how they disappear. And they hang on to them. When we have 200 or 300 people, up to 500 or 600 people come through our doors on a weekly basis, they're guaranteed they're going to be picked up and moved and taken.
I actually have taken a couple home for my husband, he's not religious at all or a Christian of any kind, but he's actually read some of them. Quite often I see the staff reading them and clients take them home all the time. So it's a need in the community.
I think the Signs resonates with people because of its relevance in life. And we're doing life with people here. That's all we're trying to do.
And I just pray every time I get a box of magazines, wherever they go, Lord, you send them to what they need, where they need it. How else do you get good information that is credible, that is trustworthy? So I say go hard because it's just something that our community needs.
If you can't get out there and rub shoulders with somebody, that you can invest in a medium that actually does that. We find it valuable here, which is why we have it. We would love to keep having it here, but obviously, as a charity, we have to find a way to fund it. And if you're sort of thinking, oh, I don't know, should I do this? Is it really going to reach the people I need it to reach? It certainly does. And, we'd love to continue to have Signs here as long as we're in operation.
Such a good video. That that brings up all kinds of feels when you watch it. Yeah, great work, Daniel and Jerry.
And if you want to share the video, Mary Ellen, people can play it in their church. We've got a download, which we can share in the chat here in the comments, that people can they can play it in their local church on one of the Sabbaths of this month, or if they're locked down, they can share it on their Zoom chats, or send the link around to their church family, because we'd love to see that message go out. And as Daniel said, that Logan project, they keep upping their subscriptions, but I believe that was a bit of a love project from Hank, who's now moved on to a different role. So those subscriptions will go for the rest of their subscription cycle, and then we may not be able to put the magazines in there anymore, depending on whether anyone will step forward to donate for that project or not. So it really is important to support places like Adra Logan that are doing absolutely amazing, life-changing work. I don't know about you, Daniel, but the day that we spent with them, it was really amazing and eye-opening. And talking with some of the people there, Debbie, who featured in the video, the volunteer, she's not a Christian. She told us up front she's not a Christian, but she finds signs interesting. She reads it sometimes, and she's dedicated to the work of Adra Logan. She just volunteers and she rocks up day after day because she just loves the work that they're doing. And so for us, I think it's humbling and it's a real privilege to partner with projects like that and provide like signs as a resource for them to use in their communities. I just really, loved our day with Adra Logan, and it was a big day. It was a busy day. There was a lot happening, a soup kitchen in the evening, but just beautiful people, phenomenal people sharing both food and healing for people, and sharing the good news of Jesus through the Signs magazines that are there.
I think the key thing to mention at this point is a person would be watching these videos. And just by the way, the video link is also on Vimeo, so you can download it from there. There's a download link on that one as opposed to YouTube, which we'll leave in the comments as well. A question that people might have is, well, half of or most of the East Coast is locked down at the moment. I think Brisbane is sort of coming out of theirs, or anyway, there's questions around these sort of projects on the East Coast. Adra Blacktown has a whole bunch of Signs magazines, but Sydney's in lockdown. So what happens then? Well, the awesome thing is it's not just this one project in Adra Logan. There's a whole bunch of these in different places. Like, for example, one of those is the Spirit of Tasmania, which is the ferry that goes from Melbourne to Devonport there in Tasmania. And our Signs magazine is being sponsored as to be in the rack, that literally when you walk through the Spirit of Tasmania, which I did at the start of, I think it was 2019, our magazine is one of the first things that people see when they walk onto the Spirit of Tasmania. And we were talking to the guy who's sort of in charge of the magazine racks there, and he said they're gone. They're all gone. People are seeing this. They're interested and they're picking it up. So there seems to be a lot of public interest for these types of magazines.
Yeah, that's awesome. What are some of the stories like? Because we talked a lot about where the magazine goes and kind of that it talks about, Christian themes and like present topics. But for example, in the last couple of issues, Daniel, what are some examples of stories that you've been able to cover in the mag, in case people are curious?
Okay, I'm glad you asked this because I'm super excited about the August edition. So pretty much, there's this lady who lives in Sydney who used to be a clairvoyant, and she actually she was working in that sort of area for a little while. She started to look deeper into angels because she thought it was angels that were communicating with her. And then she sort of came across the three angels message and started to dig deeper there. And her journey sort of led her to finding Christ and bringing about understanding about what it is what kind of forces she was communicating with. Now her story is actually the front cover of the August edition. And I'm really excited to share that with everyone who's listening. But the thing is, a lot of people might be feeling a little bit frustrated that, you know, they can't whip out a physical copy right now. You know, you might subscribe, but it might be a little bit until the magazine actually arrives to you, especially with postage delays. Like, I know some of my post has been delayed. How can we find that story straight away? Well, actually, we have a website called signsofthetimes.org.au/August. Now, if you put in your email there, we will send you straight away a free digital copy of the August edition, which has Kathy's story on page 32. And I'm super keen to share Kathy's story. And I think that understanding the spiritual realm, because we kind of have a little bit of a sub theme with the August edition. Jared wrote an article, Are Spiritual Forces Real? I think spiritual forces are one of those questions that people are actually open to. Whether or not they're hostile to Christianity or not, they would be open to understanding supernatural phenomena, because we've all seen or heard ghost stories. You know, the Hollywood movies that are out there really sort of dive into this in a dark sort of way. So there is a lot of public interest in the supernatural. And yet, where can we as Christians insert ourselves into that conversation? Well, Kathy's story is one of those ones, because she has been there. She has seen what's behind the curtain. You know, she has seen demons and that sort of stuff. And yet she's come out the other side and can honestly testify, what are these things really? So I'm super excited to share that one. I mean, we had some literature evangelists that I was in touch with, some from South Australia, led by Rita Pinzoni, and they actually did a stand at a psychic expo recently. And when I heard this, I was like, no, I wish we had this magazine ready for you when you did that expo. Maybe they can take it next year when they go to that again. But this is just a small example of the way in which, as Christians, we can provide a solution or an answer, or answers to tricky questions.
Yeah, that's great, Daniel. I really don't know if I'm allowed to say I'm proud of the August issue, but I think some of the stories in there are really, really good. And yeah, as Daniel said, you can read it for free. You can download a free copy of that, the PDF of that magazine, at the link in our comments. But that story, I really think, will resonate, Kathy's story, with a lot of people. And if you've got a friend or a neighbor who's a bit into new agey stuff, or has, you know, interests in those areas, this is a great story to share with them and to say, hey, what do you think of this lady's experience? Because she's you know, done it. She's been there and experienced that. And if I can just plug Daniel's work again a bit further, he actually interviewed Kathy for a podcast for this month. So is that coming out on Monday, Daniel, next week, or
Yeah,
Monday
right.
Monday next week? And it
this is
goes
the part where I
beyond.
plug your podcast, because if you perhaps want to send that podcast to someone, and you know you're waiting to do so right now, one thing you can do before you do that is, Jared and I actually did a podcast which was released last Monday, where we discussed the theory of what are supernatural forces. So that's one that you can also share to someone immediately.
Yeah, and that conversation was a lot of fun. We got to talk about the great controversy and the wrestle between powers of good and evil. And the Signs podcast is actually another really good resource for you to listen and learn. Mary Ellen, you and I did a conversation a week or two ago on that topic, which was fueled by that article that I wrote. That was the inspiration. So we had a chat about it in an Adventist context, but Daniel and I were chatting for our Signs audience. We were trying to address it in an accessible way, like we've been saying, in a way that might be open to the broader community. So if you're into podcasts, you enjoy listening to a good podcast, and you want to check out the Signs Radio podcast. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the podcast places.
I'm actually sending you the link now, Mary Ellen, if you could post it in the chat. So that's the one with Jared there, and you can go through and all the past episodes. But yeah, like Jared said, it's on a lot of podcasting platforms. I think iTunes doesn't exist anymore, does it? Whatever. Apple Music. It's on Apple Music. And also on Faith FM. If you go on Faith FM on Monday nights, our podcast is played there, and that's actually one of the ones where I received the most feedback. I actually heard at Mary Ellen's wedding, one of her guests from Tasmania mentioned to me, "Hey man, I listen to your podcast while I'm at the gym," and I was like, "My man, my man."
Yeah, well, I think all of this, like everything that you guys create at Science, is just so worthwhile because, you know, stories are powerful, and it's amazing that you can take these complex concepts, you know, great controversy, salvation, like all of these ideas that, you know, even for Christians who have been Christian their whole life still wrestle with, still struggle to understand, and put them into an accessible, digestible story format. It's like, why wouldn't you want to support that? So yeah, to everyone watching, if this is something you feel passionately about, please do consider supporting Science. And if you don't have the financial capacity to do so, just share this broadcast. Just share it to your timeline, or tag someone in the comments that might enjoy, like, just hearing about what these guys are doing and the amazing stories that we've been able to, glean from people. Are there any last thoughts that we'd like to share before we wrap up? Any closing?
I think I'd just reiterate Jared's point there about these places where the magazine is going. It's a simple way of sharing Jesus is just by sponsoring those magazines going there. And like I mentioned, like on the Spirit of Tasmania, like in Adra Logan, these magazines go. Like I was in touch with another literature evangelist. His name was Andrew Johnson, and he was putting magazines into this hot spring, like in this magazine rack outside this hot spring in the Northern Territory. And he said every time they pray about the magazine, they pray for them before they put them in there. Every single time they pray, they go. So there's a need for this magazine. The magazine is being picked up by the community, but the demand is much higher than supply. And a lot of these projects, they're finding that they need more. And so we're sort of appealing to people. If you want to share Jesus, then it's as simple as making sure that the magazines will continue to be there. Now the question is, how can you actually do that? Well, that same link that Mary Ellen posted before, signsofthetimes.org.au/August, there's also a download link, a donate link there. So if you can put in money there, you can put in a one-time donation or a recurring donation, and that will ensure that magazines will continue to be supplied to those places. So that's an awesome way to share your faith simply, and you can know and be assured that it's making an impact without you even having to leave your home.
Yeah.
Which we're not allowed to do at the moment anyway.
Well,
unfortunately.
Yeah. No, look, that's awesome, guys. Awesome, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us today, for all your insights and for your amazing work, evangelism work. Yeah, again, to everyone, just check the links in the comments, tag someone if they might be interested, or share this video if you feel like you can. On that note, sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, keep looking for ways to share Jesus in your lives, guys. You know, we talked last week, Mary Ellen, about the theory of it, I guess, should we? And the Great Commission, we were reminded of that and our personal responsibility, I guess, to do it, not to earn anything, but just because we want others to share the joy and the life-changing power that God has in our lives. And so I'd say, you know, get out there and share whatever way that is, whether it's sharing, as Daniel said, this video or the podcasts or other posts on your social media, whether it's handing someone a physical magazine. We'd love that. And we'd love to hear the stories back about those who have experienced that. My mum just signed up for a copy of Signs for her auntie, who I think used to get signs from my grandfather before he passed away many, many years ago. And she said very fondly, "Oh, I like that magazine. I used to get that magazine, but I haven't got it for years." And you know, she's excited to start receiving it again. So yeah, there's countless opportunities for you to shed a little bit of light in people's life. And I'd encourage you this week, until we see you next week, try and find something. That's your homework. Try and find a way to share Jesus in some way. We'd love if it was Signs, but even if it's just a conversation with a neighbor over the fence because we're all locked down or whatever, just give it a go and try and yeah, call someone up who you haven't seen or who's isolated or, you know, in a retirement home or something, and just share Jesus with them this week.
Awesome. We will see you guys next week. Thanks again, Daniel, and God bless and stay safe.
See you
Bye.
guys. Thank you.